Ladies and gentlemen, welcome from the Writers' Theatre in Glencoe, where since April 10th you can see Monsieur Chopin, a wonderful play by Hershey Felder with Hershey Felder. Hershey, thank you so much for taking your time and talking to us today.
Absolutely, I'm happy to.
If anybody in the world has a right to talk about Chopin, that'll be you. Not just because you're a wonderful musician, you know piano more than anybody, but you're also Polish, right?
I am Polish. In fact, my father was born in Ustrzykach Dolnych and emigrated to Canada in '39, so just before the war. But family's still there, and I go back regularly. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, premiered my movie about Chopin, Liszt, where I play Liszt opposite Boris Gilbert and Chopin. So we traded the roles a little bit. And Debbie Mazar plays Georges Sand and a lot of other famous people.
Wonderful.
We premiered in Warsaw, in the krakowskim mieście, right by the palace, Raciwiu, right across the street. So it was a wonderful experience, as usual.
Wonderful. So you travel there often, right?
I go to Poland often, you know, you have to go to Pierogarnia, you know, if not, you can't live. But you can here in Chicago get a little bit of that, so it's fine.
So your dad was Polish, your mom was Hungarian.
Yes.
So if you had a choice between goulash and pierogi?
Pierogi wins,
really?
Hands, absolutely,
wow.
Hands down. It's like Liszt or Chopin, you know.
I was looking for a term, and I think you're a Gesamtkunstmensch.
That's very kind, but sort of. I do a lot of things.
You do a lot, and you do it extremely successfully.
You know, I spent my life working at this. I was an actor, always a pianist from childhood.
Yeah.
You know, acting is the kind of thing that you can do sometimes and still keep your mechanism intact. Piano, no. Piano, it's all the time, every day. And as they say with the piano, if you don't practice 1 day, you know, 2 days, your agent knows, and 3 days, everybody knows. So, so that has been a lifelong commitment. And the acting, you know, I've just been doing this and writing my whole life. So what it becomes in the end is just a lifetime commitment to this. That's really what it is more than anything.
Acting and playing quality, good music, that's technically oil and water. It's unmixable, right? How do you do that?
You're right. So that's a lifetime of understanding the two mechanisms and how the mechanisms change and how they must change like that. And giving the illusion that it's the same person doing both, because it is an illusion. You can't possibly act and play while you act, for the simple reason that acting is always out. Even if I'm doing the scene quietly, it's always forward. Playing, it's here. And physically, it has to be here. It has to be relaxed, or whatever it is, it's here. It's not showing off. The showing off is what comes out of the piano, not what goes in. And so those mechanisms, to keep them both going at the same time, it's really the understanding of how to find that quick switch where now I'm playing, so you have to leave the impression that the face is still acting, but this is completely where you are thinking. And so it's learning how to create the illusion rather than acting while you're playing. You can't. It's, as you say, oil and water. It's not physically possible. And anybody who tries fails at that, because the mechanism is about an illusion, not about acting. You can't possibly be Chopin and play properly. It doesn't work. And anybody who tells you that they do that is not telling the truth.
And you go even farther, even deeper, because you complicate stuff a little more by involving the audience. Your shows
I complicate a lot.
Interactive.
Yes.
No two shows are exactly the same, I can imagine.
No. It requires real knowledge. So this was one of the things I have to say I've prided myself on, is that the constant study. I never stopped studying, because you can't. You have to always know, you have to always take it seriously, you always have to work. The moment you stop studying and stop learning information, keeping your mind going, advancing, learning new things, practicing, then it becomes flat. And also, it's irresponsible. You have to know, especially if you're going to interact with the audience as the character. I didn't want to get 3 phrases and say, this was, no. It has to be real answers, and they have to be that fast. So it's really about knowledge. But then again, isn't anything well done It's always about really knowing as opposed to kind of pretending or whatever.
Yeah. As a pianist, you obviously knew Chopin from the very beginning. As a pianist, you know his music. You understand much more than anybody who's just passing us by right now. But walk us through the process about the preparation and the studying and putting this piece that Monsieur Chopin is together.
Well, it starts with terror. You know,
Really?
everything is because you know what the responsibility is.
Mm-hmm.
You know there is so much that you have to communicate, and in good taste. And to say it's what Chopin wanted, none of us know what Chopin wanted. People will say, oh, I know what he wanted. This is what the composer wanted. We have indications in the music what he wanted. He was also very clear that he indicated. He didn't tell you play this exactly this way. He gave you suggestions that would allow you to think and allow you to feel. And so there's the responsibility of telling the story as honestly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And also playing beautifully. We do know basic things. He played beautifully. It wasn't an ugly note, except if he intended something to be vicious. And it was always dreamy and floaty and kind of otherworld. It was taking you off to another world. I do own one of Chopin's last pianos from Paris, the Pleyel 1849. So I have one. So I can imagine when I play it what it sounds like, or might have sounded like under his fingers. And that's a very interesting thing because it's not like our modern pianos.
No, totally different.
Not at all. So finding that and finding that kind of quality is interesting. And again, it's about illusion. I don't want to suggest for 1 second I'm Chopin. I'm not. You know, he was a genius. I'm not. I'm a working artist. I don't want to suggest that this is the way to play it and this is the way he would have played it, because I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody does if they tell you they do.
Yeah.
We just create illusions that allow us to dream. And in truth, that's what Chopin did. He created these musical illusions that allow us to dream. And if you can evoke that as an idea, then I think it works.
Yeah. I would go even farther, because you have to study the people, the persons who Chopin interacted with. You have to know everything about them and about the times that he lived in.
Absolutely, and that's necessary. It's necessary to know everybody who's around him. It's necessary to know what the circumstances of the composition are. So it's not just that he composed the Polonaise or he composed the Mazurka. One of the things that was always most interesting to me with all of this is understanding the context of the composition, because these people were human beings. If we look Beethoven Ninth Symphony, Beethoven Fifth Symphony, you know, those pieces that we hold as the benchmark of Western music, we say, he knew he was composing something great. No, he was a human being, and he put what he had in it, and it became an icon. It wasn't an icon before it started. Similarly with Chopin. The music has lasted because it does have that element of invention, of greatness, of hearing things the way nobody else does. He invented harmony that we didn't know before him. Yeah. And of course, it was so interesting to look at the history of people going and looking at the score and say, this is impossible to play. It's so amateur, the music doesn't make sense. And then they would hear him play it and now I understand. Because he had this whole sense of harmony. He heard nature in a different way than people were hearing in those days. And he wasn't interested in rules. And he wasn't interested in breaking rules. He was interested in creating what he heard. It wasn't about, some they break the rules to break the rules. But not Chopin. It was an invention.
And I think he was in accord. He understood the piano perfectly.
Yes.
Some people say that Liszt was always fighting with the piano and pushing it to the boundaries. Chopin didn't necessarily do that. He didn't need that.
Well, the thing about Chopin was the piano was part of an extension of him. Liszt used the piano as a mechanism to express what a piano and a person behind it can do. I don't think Chopin ever cared about that. I think Chopin was interested in drawing out music. He wasn't interested in how fast you can play and how you can dazzle the public. And it's so interesting because if you look at some of the works of Chopin, the octave study, the wind study, some other works that are really effective, just things that the Polonaise with the left hand, anything that Liszt does is not nearly as powerful as what Chopin does.
Yeah.
And it's, if you don't know the two characters, you'd think that Chopin's the one who's 6 feet and with a big body, all powerful, and Liszt is this, but no, you know, little fingers. And Chopin has such innate power in what he does. From the time he was, I mean, those studies were in his 20s, early 20s. Where they came from, it's impossible to know. And also, he didn't learn the piano. I mean, he invented the piano. You know, he never had lessons. I mean, in the way we think lessons, you know. Liszt studied with Czerny. And yet Chopin is totally self-taught. And you think...
He was shaped by a violin player for a period.
Well, he was studying with how do you call it, Żywny.
Yeah.
And he studied with Żywny, so who was a violinist. So who was teaching him music, elements of music, but certainly didn't teach him what to do with the fingers.
Yeah.
And Chopin just wanted to draw music out, and he said, whatever the fingers need to do, they will do. And I mean, where did that come from? There is a level of genius and understanding that I don't think we have seen again.
Yeah. When you were working on your plays about Leonard Bernstein, when you were doing piece on Irving Berlin, you had a chance to talk to people who knew them and draw from their experience. With Chopin, there's no way you can interact with anything like it. So you had to sort of put together your own version of Chopin. Who that person is? Who is your Chopin?
Well, you know, I understood from the people that were around him how he reflected to other people. Also from his own letters. To me, you get a really deep sense of a person from reading their own letters. You know, and thank God there weren't emails, they could discard them. But, you know, Georges Sand, she burned all his letters. Yeah. There's nothing left. I don't even think there's one letter from Chopin to Sand. You know, and to think, what an irresponsible, you know, what a stupid thing. Then again, what did she owe us? So, but she knew the greatness and the degree of greatness is that we don't have those admissions, or maybe there was nothing in them and she was embarrassed that he just did. So
we'll never know.
We'll never know. But it's amazing to look at his letters where he writes to friends, where he writes to associates, and he's a regular person. He complains about the regular things. He's naughty and nasty and in the funny ways, you know, and very, how do you call it, Polski, very full of that, also, but full of what they call żal, you know. Yeah. He's full of all of these things that create that character. And the truth is, you know, how did I model that character? A lot of his writing, but you listen carefully to the music, he tells you everything you need to know.
In the music.
It's there. And if you listen carefully, you can find that man. And that's who I've created. The man who would emerge from that music, the whimsy, the invention, the miracles. So that, to me, is what's interesting.
Let's talk about his relationship with Georges Sand. You mentioned her. Was it helping them? Was it destroying him slowly and gradually? How was it?
Well, I think, you know, as somebody said, I don't remember, it was Marie Dagout, maybe was writing about it later. I don't remember who was writing about it. No, it was one of Madame Marliani, I think, was writing about it. She said these two were bloodsuckers, and you had to keep them away from each other. And they probably were those kind of. Now, Georges Sand, if you hear the stories, you think she's a woman running about. No, she was quite small. She was quiet. She was not one of those great beauties. You know? Yeah. She was a big thinker, and she was a famous person. She was famous for her writing. She was not a movie star. And you think of these characters, what we reacted to in those days was very different. It's not what we think of as fame and power today. And so I think there were these two characters who were very complicated, who intrinsically loved each other, you know, in as best as they could, but they were also people who were selfish in ways that they needed to be for their art. And I think that poses a problem. And I think, you know, well, if you look at Lucrezia Floriani, where she writes about him, well, she says she didn't write about him, but you can kind of think she did. She was not particularly nice. And she was not maybe a nice person in the end. And I think she had a very soft spot for him, but she couldn't allow herself to understand this is who he is and I accept him for who he is. And who knows what kind of physical relationship they had, if it was a standard, we don't know. And I think to guess, oh, it was this, it was that, he was this, she was that, it's not fair because we don't know. And also, does it really matter? No, it doesn't to me. And I think people are only interested in that and interested in looking that art only comes from sexual relationships. It's not true. We know that that's not true. Love is a lot of things. And so relegating it to that simple, well, they slept together, they didn't, it doesn't matter. What does matter is that they were both creative artists in a very interesting time. And what is interesting is we don't really quote, the only way we kind of quote Georges Sand today is in context of Chopin.
Yeah, that's
we
true.
We don't really quote Georges Sand. Maybe in France a little bit, and maybe some university studies are doing these kinds of things, but for the most part, we don't quote Georges Sand.
That's so true, yeah. Another huge aspect is Chopin's żal for Poland. He's missing Poland. He's longing to go back to his country. How do you see that?
Well, this is interesting. I may have a different take than many Poles, and I speak as a Polish myself. And that is, there were two sides of him. One was that exotic memory, or the memory of the exotic, of the home in Poland. I spent a lot of time in Warsaw, but of course, the Warsaw we know now is only a small reflection of the Warsaw that was before the war, you know. But you can see that it was beautiful, and it was a real European center with interesting people, and people weren't only in the fields, you know, working the fields, dancing mazurka. I mean, it was a very westernized, you know, advanced society with great thinkers and university. You know, to think it was, you know, the fields it's not.
It's not only that.
Yeah, and I mean, or that people were just peasants, and it's not at all, in fact, and certainly not in the case of Chopin. I mean, he was already snob, you know. And so, to me, the sense is that he left, but he went to a city. He came from a city that was a mini Paris to Paris. And you know, if you go to Paris, all of a sudden, your eyes, and so all this thrilling things. And so for me, I get the sense that for Chopin, did he really long to go back, or he only wanted the memory of what it was like? Because I always say that going back may have been disappointing in those days after living in Paris. So the memory of what he created in his head, in his mind, in his family, because the truth is he could have gone back if he really desperately wanted to, because we know that Ludwika, she was coming back and forth. So yes, the Russians were causing trouble, but, you know, and I refer in the play to, if he went back, would they let him come out? The truth is he would have been able to.
There were ways.
There were ways for him. If he desperately wanted to see his parents, if he desperately wanted, and we know he went nearby because he went to, when he was 17 years old and 27 years old, he was going to marry the Maria Wojcinska. And so he was in you know, nearby where he could go. So he could go over, but he didn't. He
decided not to.
He decided not to. I mean, he decided not to because they had the breakup, but, you know, he could have. I think the memory, the exotic memory of that feeling of what Poland was much more to him than, I mean, now you go to Żelazo, it's so beautiful. Why wouldn't he want to go? First of all, you know, he left there when he was 4 months or 5 months or whatever, 6 months. He didn't have a memory of what that was. We only made it into what it is way later. Now, So I think that maybe in his mind, what he created, we were the beneficiaries, we're this magical Poland that we created. And now if you go, it's kind of like that. You know?
But that's a wonderful take. And thank you for that, because we Poles, especially those who are living abroad, we tend to look at him and focus on that particular aspect. I want to go back. I want to see Poland again. But this is so true, especially when you compare where he ended up.
Right.
Paris, center of the world, center of the artistic
world. Yeah. And you know, the idea of Poles in Chicago and these parts who want to go back, sure. Well, now it's different because going back now, it's a modern, I mean, going back now, it's being in a Western country. Now, going back 30 years ago, is something else.
Yeah.
But going back now, it's glorious. So it's fun. I love going because it's so beautiful. I mean, going through Warsaw and going through Krakow is unbelievable. It's such a vibrant, exciting, beautiful, thrilling place. But you know, with 1 million Poles in Chicago, it's also kind of not so bad.
Yeah, here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We have our own piece of Poland here in Chicago.
Exactly. So with that, it's you know, you can have beautiful trees here, but it's the character of the people, and I think that's what's beautiful.
One other factor that defined Chopin was his health. He was weaker. He was struggling with his health for so many years. How does that reflect in your version of Chopin?
Well, the interesting thing is, if you pay attention to the music, you don't hear it. I don't hear a sick person. I hear a very strong character. So knowing that he was always, you know, sick, and he was a consumptive, and he was a weak person, a little small guy, I'm much bigger than he is, so that's why he made the big stage. I look small. I don't think you can play him as a weakling, because if you play him as an actor, as a weakling,
takes away too much.
Constantly running around, coughing, sick. It's also disingenuous, because that's not the way he was all the time. Sure, it happened, and of course, but in his mind, he wasn't just a sick person. Not at all. He couldn't do what he did. He couldn't write those polonaises if he was a sick person. Yeah. So, was he not healthy? Well, he was not born with the gift of being really strong. He just wasn't, and he had times where he was, when he was young, he was doing things like everybody else. He wasn't always sick and walking around terrible. Yeah. No. There were times where he got very sick. Toward the end, he got very sick, but like a person gets sick. So he wasn't just a sickly character curled up in bed. He would go out. He was, you know, you hear about him doing things. He didn't like concerts, but he played them. But he didn't get up there coughing and spitting blood on the piano. I mean, it's nonsense. So to me, I tend to find his character in his music. So there was a strength of character there that was a lot more about just.
And there are so many pieces that are extremely powerful.
Exactly. Even the ones that are sad, they're powerfully sad. Or żal, they're powerfully that way. They're not sickly. And I think people who would describe his music as sickly, it's because they don't understand the intention of it, which is very strong. I mean, the commitment to saying something is very, very powerful. And if you play Chopin like that, like all these sick nocturnes or whatever, you know, or what is John Field said, he was a sick room talent, you know, only for the sick people. It's complete. Well, you listen to John Field, it's nothing. So it's just an amazing thing to look at and see what time reveals about a character. And what it must have been like, to me, the big fantasy is what must have been like to hear an improvisation or a work by Chopin for the first time. Yes. Now we know how brilliant, but what would it have been like? What was the shock? And conversely is, who are we hearing today that in 100 years will have the same impact? My guess is not many people, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
You know,
those improvisations, those impromptus, oh my goodness,
just the things that anything that he improvised, you know, and how do you do that?
Yeah.
And what it must have been like to the ears, you know, to not be accustomed to that and to suddenly hear that and go, you know.
Yeah, he was not just a poet of piano, he was a magician.
Magician, yes, mystical. And people like Liszt, they understood that. And people like Liszt knew that they could never do that, no matter how hard they tried.
Wow.
And the movie is based on a underlining envy.
Of Liszt towards Chopin. You invite the audience to Chopin's salon for a piano lesson. What happens there on stage?
I'm not going to tell you everything.
No, don't give any spoilers.
I will tell you what the concept is. So we know that on the 4th of March in 1848, after Sand threw him out from Nohant. They don't see each other. He's invited to tea at Marigliani's house in the Square d'Orléans. And he goes up, and as he's finishing the tea, he's coming down, and Sand is going up. She's coming to visit. And they touch hands for a minute, but they don't really say anything except that Chopin tells Sand that she has a granddaughter because she didn't know, she threw out the daughter. And to me, that was fascinating in understanding what would have happened after. You know, you don't see somebody for a year. It stirs in you. It's all these things. And then after a year, all of a sudden you bump into them.
Yeah.
What? And so let's say he had to come and teach a piano lesson after this. He probably didn't, he was sick, but let's say he had to, or ran into one person or something. What would have happened? That's what the play is.
The students back then, they must have felt it.
You can imagine, and hopefully now they feel it too. But that was the concept of. I always wondered what happened after that moment. Did you just go home and say, "Oh, I bumped into Sand"?
No.
You can imagine what he felt after that, and so that's what was interesting to me, because we know that to be fact, that happened, and then the fantasy is
And this is a very relatable situation. We all had those moments when we met an important figure from our past, our exes.
Or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you go,
oh my.
Right, so yeah.
There's also a number of performances that you give. There's a number of Chopin's pieces that you play. Can you name just a few?
Well, we have Opus 53 of Polonaise, which is always a big, huge thing and a very difficult part of the play. When he has kind of an emotional breakdown, and all of a sudden I have to play this huge thing, and that's the real technique that I talk about, is how to do that.
Yeah.
I have a collection of prelude. I have a collection of waltzes. There is, from the Funeral March Sonata, there is also First Polonaise when he was 7 years old. I mean, it's things that a lot of people don't really know. And mazurkas. And it's also describing what these mean and what these mean to a Polish person. So it's wonderful, because I've played it in New York, I've played it in Warsaw. And you know, in Warsaw, the hardest thing is of course, because everybody knows everything about Chopin and nobody's very easy. It was so nice to be well received. And it wasn't because I'm Polish, it was because I believe that I paid the proper respect without cheapening it, without making him, you know, what tends to sometimes be made a fake character, or to give him real issues. There are real problems there, you know. He was not always stable. He had complicated mental situation. We know it today to be bipolar disorder, but that was the description.
And we know it now.
We know it now, we didn't know then. So that is a very interesting thing.
You wrote Monsieur Chopin.
Did.
A number of years ago, right? But the show...
18
years ago. But the show evolved.
Oh, yeah.
How much did it change?
Well, the original concept was the same, but, well, you know, it's like with everything. I'm not the same artist I was 18 years ago. And so I'd like to think I've learned a lot. And so what is included in the piece is different. The concept, the overall concept is the same, but the piece is nowhere near what it was. No. But that's how things develop, you know. You can't be, you know, in your 30s and write something and then be in your 50s and do the same thing. Yeah. That did happen with the Gershwin show. That thing just stayed the way it was for 30 years, and nothing I can do about it.
Hershey, everybody's complimenting you about your ability to mimic language. You are awesome at picking up accents. Yeah. When you did a show about Beethoven, your German accent was magnificent. How do you speak as a Chopin? Is it Polish accent? Is it French?
No. You can't speak French because he was Polish. And we know very clearly from Delacroix writing how Chopin would pronounce things, because he said so.
Oh, yeah?
So, yes, Delacroix says that, you know, you'd say in French, mon Dieu, my God. And he said Chopin would say, mon Dieu, mon Dieu, mon Dieu, a bit the way a Polish would say. And so when I first learned the role, it so happens that I was here in Chicago. And of course, it was very easy to find people who speak English with Polish accents. Not French, but English with Polish accent. So I become very Polish, and everything is very Polish, and I speak very much Polish. And you would think I'm right from Poland, fresh off the boat.
You see? This is awesome.
Yeah, Polish. And, you know, and it's how much, because, you know, you have a lot of this, the ow, to focus on the ow into the Polish, and to how to do that, with it's not too much so Americans can understand it, and yet it's very clearly Polish cadence, Polish nuance. But
wow, bravo! That little sample was really spot on.
Sound like your whole family,
exactly.
Right? Yes, exactly.
Wow, thank you so much. What do you expect the audience feels? What do you want the audience to walk out with in terms of their memories, feelings?
It's a good question, but the truth is, I can't expect anything, because if I do, then I'm doing the wrong thing. I just want to present, and what they take away. Yeah, and everybody you ask will be something different.
Yeah, I bet.
It's what I put in, and I just want it to be honest, fair, and true. And then what people come away with is, I hope, a sense of who he might have been. I don't want to say this is the sense of who he was, because we don't know. But if we understand how he thought, and how the music meant something to him, and why it meant something to him, maybe they'll give people an impression of their own imaginations. I always say this, that he was very smart in his way. He said, I only indicate at the keyboard, I don't tell you what to think. And that is, to me, very important. He didn't say, the ballad is about the, you know, he said, people said, oh, it's about the Battle of Grochov and this. And he said, it's not that. He said, it's what you think it is. He says, I don't want to put certain things. He said, there are one or two pieces. He said, you know, when Wodzinska left, he said, this is Valse de l'Adieu, a few pieces like this. But for the most part, it was not that at all. It was, he allowed us to think. He called it ballad, mazurka, polonaise. Yeah. He didn't tell us this is about this and this is about that. He gave you an idea. And so that's what I wish to do here, is give an idea. And whatever you come away with, you come away with.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Hurry up, ladies and gentlemen. The show is going to be here at Writers Theatre only until May 12th. That gives you ample opportunity to get tickets and see Hershey Felder, Monsieur Chopin himself, on stage, impersonating one of the most important figures, not just of Polish music, but the world's music as a whole. Hershey, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It was a great pleasure.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. Dziękuję.
Thank you. Thank you.